Hey everyone, it is Ed Gutowski. I wanted to create a new video that can help us to understand, continue to understand how rhetoric and argument works. Our class likes to define the word rhetoric. They like to use the word persuade as part of their definition. And I'm still going to maintain my definition, which is words that are used to mislead, deceive, and con people. I've read all your discussion boards on what you think about how rhetoric uses logos, pathos, ethos, but I'm now going to add to our understanding of rhetoric and argument by talking about fallacies. And fallacies are a way that rhetoric does in fact separate itself from an argument, because rhetoric will always use fallacies while a good argument will try to avoid fallacies. So what we need to do first of all is we need to define the term fallacy, just so that students can have a basic understanding of the term itself. I sometimes think students hear the word fallacy and they panic. They think fallacies are something that's hard or confusing, but in many cases, fallacies can be very easy to identify. Some of them are silly, and some of them are just downright stupid. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the term fallacy. And in a ground class, I might ask a student, okay, what do you think the word fallacy means, just by either looking at or hearing the word itself? And most students, you can hear the term fallacy and what immediately comes to mind is something that's false or something that's fake. And I love both of those definitions. But a little more academic definition of a fallacy, and it's my definition of a fallacy, is pretty simple, because my definition of fallacy is just merely using false logic. So if you think about that definition, so just accept my definition of rhetoric for a second, where it's words used to mislead, deceive, and con people, and then accept my definition of fallacy as false logic. Well, when you go out into the real world and you come across someone using rhetoric, right, and they're using words that are used to mislead, deceive, and con people, and you catch them using a fallacy, something that's fake, something that's false, or false logic, what happens is your brain starts to critically think, and rhetoric has less of an impact on you. So I always think it's kind of fun to kind of play around with fallacies. So there are 3 fallacies in our textbook that I particularly like. I think they're kind of clever. So the first fallacy that I like in our textbook is the ad hominem. So the ad hominem is when you attack a person's character rather than addressing the issue. Right? So it's when you attack a person's character rather than addressing the issue. And in a ground class, I might make fun of a student who says, who's angry at me. He doesn't like me. So he goes on Rate My Professor and he says, don't take Professor Gutowski's class. He's just like Hitler. Don't take Professor Gutowski. He's just like Stalin. Don't take Professor Gutowski's class because he's a son of a bitch. Well, notice that student used an ad hominem. He attacked my character without addressing the issue, right? Because what he could have said is, hey, don't take Professor Gutowski. He's a terrible online English 1C instructor. Don't take Professor Gutowski. He requires a lot of reading. Don't take Professor Gutowski because he screws up the dates on Canvas, right? Rather, instead of addressing an issue, that student attacks my character. So I always like the ad hominem. The second fallacy I find interesting is the non sequitur. And I was looking to see if I'll just grab these 2 things right. But a non sequitur is when you join 2 things together that have nothing in common. There's my train and my car, right? But a non sequitur is when you take 2 things and they have nothing in common and you try to join them together. So, the non sequitur, again, if I were to make up an imaginary student who doesn't like me, goes on to Rate My Professor, and he might write something like, don't take Professor Gutowski, his class is just like Auschwitz. Don't take Professor Gutowski's class because it's like Dachau. Don't take Professor Gutowski's class because you'll be bored and he's like a concentration camp guard. Right? Again, that's an example of associating 2 things that have nothing in common, because no matter what you think of my class, a concentration camp and an English 1C class, especially in 1C class online, have absolutely nothing in common. I think the reason why I like these 2 fallacies is because we see them all the time. Notice politically, in the last couple of years, we've seen them used all the time. Trump liked to refer to people as stupid, dumb, and lazy. There was always crooked Hillary Clinton, right? notice that oftentimes when we get into really heated issues like abortion, people will say abortion is just like the Holocaust, right? And those two things really have nothing in common. So I like those two examples because I think I see them all the time politically. The other fallacy that I think is always so interesting is the bandwagon. And notice, I think I like the bandwagon because it's so easy. Everyone else is doing it, why aren't you? Everyone else is taking Professor Gutowski's online class, why aren't you? Everyone else is smoking pot, why aren't you? So I just want to use these kind of three examples because I think they kind of, when you understand how fallacies work, some of them are fun, some of them are silly, but I think it's important to understand fallacies because we see them all the time in the real world. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to post a discussion board question, which you're going to look over the fallacies in our textbook, and you're going to kind of pick the fallacy that you like the best. So that's just the end of this lecture on fallacies, and I'll look forward to what you have to say for this week.